our head of state, stands in contradiction to the democratic ethos of modern British society. That is not tenable, and it's not sustainable. The royal family have immense personal private wealth. Much of this has been accrued over the centuries through colonization and conquest, not just in Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and the Pacific, but also through conquests within what is now the UK, the conquest of Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Cornwall. These were conquests that brought the royal family immense treasures in terms of land and resources, which they have exploited, from which they have personally gained. The royals have used their powers for self-aggrandizement. They have accrued an extraordinary range of extraordinary titles. King Charles, for example, is Lord High Admiral of the Fleet. He is Air Chief Marshal. He is Field Marshal of the Army. He has never earned these titles. He has never risen through the ranks to achieve those titles. And look at the medals he wears and the uniforms he wears. They are not based on actual service. They're based on egoism, arrogance, and self-aggrandizement. Titles like Prince and Princess of Wales are ongoing symbols of English conquest of the Welsh people. To have an English royal family take those titles, even though they have no connection to Wales, that is not only an insult, but it reminds the Welsh people of the conquest of Wales by England and the fact that even today, English people hold those titles through the royal family. Our head of state is vested in the monarch, and the monarch is based on the all-white Windsor family. So when a head of state is chosen, it is based on inheritance from that all-white family. This means that the highest public office in the United Kingdom, head of state, cannot for the foreseeable future ever be held by a non-white person. It means there is a de facto automatic bar on any Black, Asian, or other minority ethnic person holding the highest office in the land. That is de facto racism. During all the 7 decades of the late Queen's reign, including the more liberal atmosphere of the last 2 decades, the Queen never once acknowledged the existence of LGBT plus people. As far as we know, the words lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender never passed her lips in public, in no public statements or speeches, in no public announcements. She never visited or supported an LGBT plus charity, despite being the patron of many, many diverse charities across the UK. I just think that really sends a very negative signal to LGBT plus citizens. It's like we don't count, or even we don't exist. The Equality Act 2010 is designed to protect everyone against discrimination and to guarantee equal treatment for every person in this country. But the royals have chosen to exempt themselves from aspects of those equality laws. They don't believe in the principle of universal human rights, equality for all, and non-discrimination. They want the right in certain circumstances to discriminate. And that goes not just against the Equality Act, but the whole democratic egalitarian ethos of modern British society. It is further evidence of just how out of touch and how autocratic they are in many ways. One of the great arguments of royalists is that the royal family bring in tourists. Well, that is a complete nonsense. The Royal Palace of Versailles in France has far more visitors than any royal palace in the UK, despite the fact the French royal family having been removed over 200 years ago. If you look at Legoland, it has many more visitors than nearby Windsor Castle. So the tourist argument does not stack up. People would come to see the palaces regardless of whether there were royals in them. The royals receive a huge amount of public funding, much greater than is publicly officially acknowledged, probably closer to £500 million a year. This is despite the fact that they have immense personal private wealth. The royals have fabulous private personal wealth. They've got 23 royal palaces and residences. They have around about 700 servants, and they have a combined personal wealth of in excess of £2 billion. £2 billion. Much of that was inherited by King Charles from his late mother, and he didn't pay a penny in inheritance tax. That's outrageous. It's an abuse of the taxation system. It's an abuse of the rules that apply to everyone else. It symbolizes royal privilege. The royals lack the fundamental transparency that applies to every other public institution. We are not allowed to know what tax, if any, they pay. It's all covered up. It's regarded as a private matter. But these are public officials paid by the public, so we have a right to know. It's time the royal finances were opened up. And if there's nothing to hide, they have no reason to refuse to be transparent. Although many of them are officially state-owned, public access to many royal palaces is severely restricted or non-existent. These are state properties and should be open, at least in part, to the wider public. Moreover, it's outrageous that we have to pay to go to view palaces that belong to us, the people. The charges are exorbitant. It's an exploitation. It's a use or abuse of royal power. And on top of that, there is an extraordinary royal picture collection, one of the greatest picture collections in the entire world. Yet most of it is not publicly accessible. Much of it is hidden away in vaults when it could be distributed and put on display in regional art galleries in Belfast, Cardiff, Edinburgh, Birmingham, Manchester, and other cities. We need to open those royal picture collections to public viewing. And the fact that the royals will not allow this shows their arrogance and contempt for the British people. The royal family has a very sorry, sad history of relationships with dictators and tyrants. Our royal family has, on many occasions, repeatedly feted dictators who are tyrannizing and persecuting their own people, particularly royal dictators from places like Brunei and Middle Eastern countries like Dubai. These people, in some cases, have actually been personal friends of the monarch. So, for example, the head of Dubai, the dictator of Dubai, was a close personal friend of the late Queen Elizabeth. Their connection was through horse racing. The Queen has received horses as gifts from many different tyrants in other parts of the world. I don't think those gifts should have ever been accepted, because in doing so, it was colluding with tyranny, and it was giving legitimacy to tyrannical regimes. Because we have an unelected, inherited head of state based on the royal family and the line of inheritance, we get what we get. We can't change it. So it means that even the most stupid, lazy, and immoral firstborn in the royal family would be entitled to be head of state, and we couldn't remove them. It means that that firstborn in the royal family has more entitlement, indeed the only entitlement to be head of state, over and above the wisest, most hardworking, and most ethical citizen. And that's why it's a very risky prospectus. We ended up with King Edward VIII, who many regard as a Nazi sympathizer, or at least someone who would have eventually had an accommodation with the Nazi regime. And there would have been nothing that we could have done to remove him. Fortunately, he abdicated before that crisis crunch point happened. But it could happen again. We could again in the future end up with a head of state like King Edward VIII, and there'd be nothing we could do to stop him. In a democratic society, we pride ourselves that our government is based on a democratic election by the people. Yet the office of head of state is barred from democratic election and public scrutiny and accountability. It means that our head of state stands in contradiction to the democratic ethos of modern British society. That is not tenable and it's not sustainable. The alternative to an unelected head of state is an elected head of state. Britain could have a president, a low-cost, purely ceremonial president like they have in Ireland and Germany, which costs 1/20th of the official cost of our royal family and more like 100 times less than the real cost. We don't want an American-style executive president with huge powers. Those powers should rightly reside with the Prime Minister, chosen through parliamentary majority, elected by the people. That's the way that we should go. It's the way that most modern democracies do go.